welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and other literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick, the host of the program, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, author Camille Pagan. Camille Pagan is the #1 Amazon charts and Washington Post bestselling author of 8 novels, including This Won't End Well, I'm Fine and Neither Are You, Life and Other Near-Death Experiences, which has been optioned for film, and her latest, Everything Must Go. Her books have been translated into nearly 24 languages. Camille has written for the New York Times, O, the Oprah Magazine, Real Simple, and many other publications. She's also a certified coach who helps other authors get published and create better writing careers. So, let's get started. Camille Pagan, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you on. And in addition to being a best-selling author, you're also an author coach. So we definitely have a lot to talk about today.
Yay.
But first, congratulations on your latest novel, your 8th, Everything
Yes.
Go.
Thank you.
I usually like to start out talking about reading a few reviews and blurbs about the books that we talk about.
Okay,
So,
great.
so I'll go ahead and highlight a few of those now for Everything Must Go. Booklist says Pagan brings her trademark wit to Lane's story, which will remind readers that it's never too late to begin again.
I love that.
Author Kelley says, I will not miss a Camille Pagan novel, and this is why. The most relatable women between two covers, the most interesting situations, the most satisfyingly emotional outcomes. Everything Must Go has all of that. The family secrets keep unfolding and the pages fly by in this moving, big-hearted read. Author Lori Nelson says a beautiful exploration of love and friendship, secrets and regrets, exquisitely presented with Pagan's lyrical prose and trademark wit. This novel is a must-read for anyone who has a dream deferred and is finally ready to reclaim it. And one more, author Barbara O'Neill says, Everything Must Go is a clear-sighted, generous look at a woman grappling with her awakening voice. I love everything, Pagan writes, and this one is a moving and thoughtful addition to her growing list of wonderful books.
Oh.
So with that intro, let's dive in. And can you start off by telling us a little about Everything Must Go?
Yeah, thank you so much. So my latest novel, my 8th, which is still super surreal. I'm like, how? How did we get here? It's a story of a people pleaser who's vowed to finally break her people pleasing habit and live on her own terms. And this is all spurred by the death of her beloved dog. And her husband makes a off the cuff remark about the dog, kind of implying that it shouldn't be that big of a deal that the dog has passed. And that's her breaking point. So she resolves to really take back her independence, her own needs. And no sooner does she make that decision when her sisters call her and say, Mom is losing it. You need to come home to Brooklyn. So she's living in Michigan, very happily away from the rest of her family. She goes to see them a couple times a year, and that's enough for her. And she does, in fact, go back to Brooklyn. At first, thinks that her mother is totally fine. And I'm not even giving away too much by saying it very quickly becomes apparent that that's not the case. As with dementia in its early stages, it's often hard to tell what the real situation is, and Lane experiences this with Sally, her mother. And in doing so, also bumps into her former best friend, um, who becomes a bit of a love interest for her. They were very close when they were younger. This man, Ben, she shared everything with him, and he got a little too close to her, and she pushed him away. And so they're kind of finding a new relationship on their own terms as well. Yeah.
What was the spark for this one for you? What was that little seed that got
Yeah.
started?
So I always wanted to write a story about 3 sisters. I'm the eldest of 3 girls. My protagonist is in the middle,
Mhm.
and I like to write far enough away from my own life. So every one of my stories, of course, they're all mine. They are all inspired by the life I've lived and the people I've met, but I always deliberately try to write away from my actual life. Otherwise, I'd be a memoirist. So I knew I wanted to write about 3 sisters, but in a different context. And I was just thinking through people pleasing. This was something I went through a lot in my training as a certified coach. We really went deep on why do people behave this way? Short answer, we're socialized to, especially women, right? We're told that we should really be making everyone else happy. Even
Mhm.
in this day and age, that's very much a thing.
Mhm.
And so I was thinking through this for myself personally and for my clients, and I thought, wouldn't that be fun to explore in fiction? And so this book was born.
And as you mentioned, you tackle dementia in
Yeah,
the book, and you actually write from the point of view of Sally, the
yeah,
mother, who is realizing, I think, herself too, that she's suffering from dementia.
yeah.
How did you make the choice to write specifically from her point of view, and then how did you get in there and prepare for that?
Yeah, so I believe in doing some planning and some plotting for each of my books. I found it to be a way to ensure that I don't have 17 rewrites. If I really think through the character arc in advance and what is the problem here. And so I did that, but this is where I'll tell clients, hold on loosely. Don't hold on too tight to your plot because as you start writing, some of that magic happens.
Mhm.
And with this book, I was writing a few chapters from Lane's perspective, and I was like, oh, this is great. And I just had this spark of inspiration to start writing from Sally's point of view. I thought her voice needs to be heard. We don't want her to be this cardboard character. I wanted to really give her some dimension. And
Mhm.
so all of my other novels have only been single point of view. And this one, it just came very organically to do it this way. And I loved writing it. Every time I wrote a Sally chapter, it was like breath of fresh air, kind of. The story is heavy, and of course, it's hard to recognize that something is going on with your health, whether it's in your mind or your body, that's
Mhm.
really challenging. And yet, Sally just takes things in stride and is such a fun character that it was a relief for me to write her.
And you are known for, among other things, writing women who feel exceptionally real and relatable
Mm,
to your readers. You sort of touched on this a second ago, but um, do you often or ever
hmm.
model your characters after specific real people, or are they always kind of a composite, or how does that work out for you?
They're both a composite, and there's always something about them that makes them unlike anyone I've met. I think about fiction, it's like a concentrated version of real life because you're really only looking at one part of a person's life. 99% of the time. There are books that span the lifespan, but those are pretty unusual.
Mhm.
And so you're almost turning it up just a little bit where the personality might be a tiny bit exaggerated or the situation might be exaggerated. When I get reviews or criticism about, oh, I hate when people say this. They say, I just wanted to slap her. And I think, well, first of all, get some anger management. But second
Yeah.
of all, I'm never going to apologize for writing flawed characters. I don't want perfect people on my Instagram feed. I don't want them in my books, right? No
Mhm.
one wants to see someone who everything is just perfect. Vulnerability is what makes us humans. And if you don't have that, you're a sociopath. So, yeah.
What normally comes to you first? I mean, you've 8 novels now.
Yeah.
Is it sometimes is it a character that it
Hmm.
usually, starts out, or is it, that plot or that idea, that you wanted to write about
Yeah.
family and sisters, for example, and everything must go?
It usually is this kind of big bang of a plot. And then I think, well, who's the perfect person in that story?
Mhm.
And it comes together so tightly together that it's almost hard to tell what came first.
Mhm.
Every time I think, well, that'd be a good story, there's some person that appears in my head. Because when I'm teaching writing, I always talk about how you want a person who, whatever is happening, it's at odds with who they are,
Mhm.
whether it's their innate personality, their wound, what they really want in life. That's where you get the tension,
Mhm.
is that, juxtaposition of character versus plot. Like these things must not go together well.
Mhm.
And I think that's why I think of them usually at the same time.
That's great. What Ann Arbor, Michigan, which I believe is where
Hmm.
you are now, correct?
Yep.
And Brooklyn, where you and your family have spent a lot of time,
Yeah.
or lived for
I lived
several
there for a
years,
decade.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, a fair amount of time.
Yeah.
they both uh, they both feature pretty prominently in Everything Must Go. Do
Yeah.
you how do you feel like your place or where you're living at the time
Mhm.
influences the stories that you decide to tell?
So you'll see usually four main settings in my books:
Mhm.
Chicago, New York, Ann Arbor, and Puerto Rico. And those are the four places I've spent the most time.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, usually I grew up in Michigan, moved away to go work in publishing, lived there for a decade with my husband. We had a short blip in Chicago and have been in Ann Arbor for a decade now too. And I just like to write about what I know in terms of place. I know some people will, they like to go all over, but setting is so important to me. So I'm not saying never, but I usually will write about where I've spent a lot of time. I also write about destinations I go to. I've written about Paris, I've written about Rome. I like to go on trips and then, somehow work that into my book
Mhm.
because it's just so fun.
How did you get started with writing? Have you
Yeah.
always written? Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer, or did you kind of just
Yeah, I did. So I think it was as early as, maybe 5, 6, when I realized someone was writing the books that I was reading.
Mhm.
But I grew up in a very like working class, not a lot of money. We were very poor when I was young. And I was the first person in both sides of my family to go to college, and I was on a scholarship. And so my parents, meaning well, were like, go do something useful, meaning go do something where you can get paid. And I didn't know a single person in my entire life who was getting paid to write.
Mhm.
So went to school, was studying medicine, interned for a really wonderful cardiologist. I was her research assistant. And she told me, said with love, Camille, you should write about medicine, not practice it. And thank God, because someone would have died. So, so I went to work in magazines. I went to a post-grad course, met my husband there, went to work in publishing and worked for fitness. I worked for Lifetime Television, which then had a print publication and a website. I was their health and psychology editor. Then began writing for every publication you can think of: WebMD, the New York Times, Forbes, you name it. I wrote for them primarily about health and psychology. And when I was 30, I was doing this very happily, was making six figures a year in a career where everyone was like, expect pennies. I was like, no, this is great. But I had my daughter, and a really good friend of mine died of colon cancer in her early 30s.
Oh, wow.
It was one of these life and death moments. And I thought, okay, enough dreaming about writing novels, go write one. And so I wrote a book in 4 months. Every night my daughter
Wow.
would go to bed. I know. It's like this first book fever. I hear a lot of writers have this where when you finally get the idea, you're like, Kermit the Frog on the typing on the whatever it's called, the typewriter. You just kind of go crazy.
Uh-huh.
And so 4 months later, I had a book on my hands, and I knew the minute I was done, I was like, oh, I'm going to do this again and again and again. Yeah.
So then what? So you've got the book. What was the road to publication like for you for
Yeah.
the first one?
So it looked like an amazing success story. I had an agent. I sent out 7 queries, had 2 offers within, like, I don't know, 10 days. Um, Signed with my agent, who is still my agent. And we took the book out to the market and had a six-figure auction. Sold to Germany, sold to Turkey in advance, like all of these foreign rights. And I'm thinking like, oh, I'm on my way. This is amazing. I'm just going to do a book a year. Publisher gives the book a very dark cover. It was like a ballerina bent over, and it was like very somber.
Mhm.
Spoiler alert for anyone who's read my books, I tackle heavy topics in a very light way. So a lot of the criticism was like, this was not what I was expecting. The book did not sell well. My publisher for a while was like, send us some proposals, we'll see. And then it quickly became apparent that they were never going to buy another book from me, like anytime soon, because the first one didn't hold up to what they spent on it.
Mhm.
So I spent 3 years writing one draft after another, really trying to write to market and please other people. I was kind of looking at what was selling, and I wrote a historical fiction novel that was awful and taught me that I never want to write historical fiction. As much as I dealt with facts in my journalism life, I did
Mhm,
not like doing it in fiction to
mhm,
that degree.
mhm.
Um, I wrote a romance novel that was awful, and I wrote a four-person perspective book that was just a hot mess. So
It's
I'm
amazing
like,
to me though that you're just churning out these novels. It takes some
yeah,
people 10 years to get one, and you're like, well, I tried this, and I wrote this novel, and I wrote
yeah.
that one.
It was my MFA. It was like my one-person MFA.
Uh-huh.
So I really almost was ready to give it all up, and I was on assignment in Santa Monica. And I had like an hour or two to kill.
Mhm.
And I went out to the beach, and suddenly I just had this idea for a novel. And it just came to me. It was that spark of like character and situation all at once. So I ran back to my room, started writing down frantically, went home, wrote another book in 4 months. That became Life and Other Near-Death Experiences. And it was the book that I wrote for myself. And when people say, what is your favorite? I say that one because it
Mhm.
taught me to really have my own voice, to not try to sound like anyone else, not write a book like anyone else's. Um, and my publisher, who's still my publisher, Lake Union, said that that is one of the books to this day that they get pitched in the vein of Life and Other Near-Death Experiences the most.
Wow.
Yeah, so that book sold for, I mean, I sold it for I don't know, the equivalent of like 3 magazine stories. It
Mhm.
was so little money, and it's done so well. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Yeah, and it really set me on my path of writing a book a year. Now I'm writing one every 9 months. It's been amazing.
What is your writing routine like that
Hmm.
you're able to get a book a year
Yeah.
done and it's several in 4 months?
It's honestly really easy. So I'm going to give you guys a big spoiler alert that will like ruin all of coaching for you. So when we don't do what we say we're going to do, because it's just planning, right? You look at your
Mhm,
calendar, how many hours do I need to write? Do some plotting. If you come to me and say that you're pantsing, I know that it's going to be a longer process for you. There's nothing wrong with that, but I have yet to meet a writer who does not spend more time writing a novel who is pantsing it.
mhm,
Um, so when we are like, I'm going to sit down for 3 hours and write, which by the way is what I do. So every morning, 9 to noon, that's what I do, no matter what is going on. And writing, it could be drafting, it could be editing a book I've already written, it could be going through proofreads, but anything under that umbrella, no marketing.
mhm.
Um, when we don't do that, it's because we just don't want to feel uncomfortable. And I wish someone had told me that like decades ago.
Mhm,
There's no big bad thing that you're trying to avoid. It's not failure. It's really just the discomfort of not knowing what you're doing in a scene. And you
mhm.
have to work through that in order to produce. So, yeah. And that's half of what I do as a coach is helping
Well,
people process that discomfort.
and I want to go into more about what you do as a coach in just a second, but I just want to get in there as a pantser.
Yeah.
how, how do you reform the pantsers?
I have a three-step process that I use.
Mhm,
That is something I just worked on book after book to figure out what worked for me.
mhm,
I always preface this with use what works for you. I have people who are really devoted to like a save the cat outline,
mhm,
and that's what they do, or whatever method that they use. But I will go in and I'll write a log line first. So,
mhm,
simple summary that is basically those two elements that I was telling you about. Who is the person
mhm,
and what is the problem? And a good log line explains that to you. You know exactly who they are. Use your adjectives. Everyone's afraid of adjectives because we've been told not to use them. When you're describing a book, it's the best thing you can do. What is this person? Are they a people pleaser? Are they cynical? Are they an optimist? Like use some words that are describing who they are at their core, or at least who they are in that moment. So I write a log line, then I go in and do a 3 act structure to figure out what is going on in this book.
mhm,
What is the beginning, the middle, the end? If you Google like Pixar 3 act structure or Disney 3 act structure, steal
mhm,
from screenwriting. That stuff is so effective. So do that very quickly, see if I have something going on there. And then I do this backward thing. So query letters are my specialty. I love them. I'm really good at them. Every jacket copy you read in one of my books, I wrote it.
mhm.
Like it
Wow.
really, yeah, it's a superpower. I tell
It
people who
really
are
is.
like, I don't want to do this. I'm like, you should learn to do it. It's not that hard. If you can write a book, you can write the copy.
Mhm,
And I will do that for my book before I begin writing it to see, is there a story here? because there is something about that. Notice I haven't said anything about like detailed outlines yet.
Mm-hmm.
You can see what's missing in writing that one pager. If it doesn't work there, it's not going to work in the book. And that's it.
Good
From
idea.
there, you can do the whole, every scene if you want. I have a lot of writers who love their note cards and their whatever, their stickies.
Mhm.
That's all good, but start with the core of the story.
How did you get into author coaching? And what
Yeah.
exactly, what does that look like,
Yeah.
every day for you as an author coach? What is talk
So
about
I don't do what you're going to hear from most people who are book coaches.
Mhm.
Book coaches are often looking at the pages as they go, helping you form your story. I don't do any of that. I don't look at pages. I really am working on mindset and strategy. So I was already doing this for a long time, mentoring people and then doing kind of consulting. And I realized that there was a piece missing, which was how do you address the life, the mindset? And even as someone who studied psychology for 20 years, I've talked to Kristen Neff, I've talked to Marty Seligman, like every great mind, I didn't know how to apply that.
Mhm.
And so I started getting coached when I had gone through a big personal disappointment, um, or professional disappointment. I had had my publisher reject a book that I thought was going to be like the big book.
Mhm.
And I was devastated. And to everyone else, it looked like my career was going swimmingly, and I just could not get out of it. I was in my head. So I went through a coaching program, like a group coaching that I really liked because I just wanted to test it a little. And then I hired a one-on-one coach, transformative, like changed not only my approach to work, but the rest of my life. And this is the funny thing. People think that going for the one thing is going to take up all of their time or like their energy. Everything else gets better because it's like change is a macro skill.
Mhm.
So you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to neglect my kids and my marriage is going to fall apart. I discovered the exact opposite. And now I see that with clients too. There's just something about concentrating on one area of your life that allows you to show up as the person you want to be everywhere else. So, anyways, the pandemic starts and I had an opportunity to get certified. And I just did this crazy thing and hit the yes button and applied. And then I told my husband, and I was thinking, like, what have I done? And he and my sisters and everyone I knew, they were like, oh, that's perfect for you. And so
Wow.
did a year-long training, started working with people really in earnest in January of 2021.
Mhm.
Really turning it into what it is now versus what I've been doing, which was like, oh, yeah, we'll just get on the calendar and I'll meet with you for 4 weeks. Now I do a minimum of 12 because we know research shows it takes that long to change, to really have the stuff be baked in. I meet with people, my clients, once a week for at least 12 weeks. Some of them sign on longer than that. And we just go from the bottom up. So, starting off with like, what are your big goals? How do you approach scheduling? What is your story like that you're telling about what you've done so far? It doesn't matter how old or young the person is, what their gender is, what genre they're writing in. Every single writer has a story that they didn't start soon enough and they're writing the wrong thing. It's hilarious. And from there, it's really personalized to what they're trying to achieve. Some people come to me and making money is their main goal. Others, it's just they have a lot of stories around publishing being awful. That is why I'm really open about. I don't think it's awful. I think it gives us careers, and there's so many different doors. And if we're willing to explore all of those, that's where success comes from. Yeah,
How do you find your clients?
they find
How do
me.
they find you? I
Yeah.
assume they find you. You're
So I
How
only
do you
work with,
choose them then?
yeah.
Do you take everybody? Do you like, how do you decide if they're viable or?
I very rarely have to say no to someone, because I do find that. So I only work with like 6 to 7 people at one time. For a
Mhm.
while, I was seeing as many as 14 clients. Now I work a lot more intensively where we have a Slack channel that's just between us. And in between sessions, you can ask me whatever you want. So I'm really there in the thick with them the whole way through. Most people find me through Instagram, not advertising. They just click on the little link tree thing and they see that I coach, and then they're like, oh, and word of mouth is about half of my client list right now, where one writer works with me and tells someone else, oh, go talk to Camille. Yeah. I don't advertise or do anything like that. Maybe I should. It's probably not the
Well,
best idea, but
then
but I
you'll
do
have too
believe,
many.
yes. So anyone who is willing to go work with someone, and especially like it's not cheap. I'm mid four figures.
Mhm.
It is an investment in your career, and I think I'm a really good coach, but I also think people come to me when they're ready to make it happen. And
Mhm.
that's part of it, where they know deep down. I've never had anyone come to me who couldn't write. And I know because I often see their stuff, later, or we'll look at the query letter together. I do that, even though I'm not doing actual pages.
Mhm.
Um, I'll be talking to them about their story. I have yet to work with anyone who is not at heart a good writer. And I just think that there's some belief deep down there that maybe you're repressing because you feel like, I don't know, like you shouldn't say that out loud, or maybe you're wrong or you'll jinx it. But somewhere, the person who clicks, yes, I want to work with a coach, like they know it's possible. They just need to figure out some of the how and that mindset piece.
Do you think
Yeah.
there are specific qualities that a person has that make them a good writer or a successful, have the possibility to be a successful writer?
It's some of the things that we use against ourselves. So most writers, and this is definitely, I'm like a Cancer born under a Cancer moon who cries at like every commercial. We're really usually pretty sensitive, which is why this career can be so hard.
Mhm.
When you get tagged on Instagram in a crappy review, or you get another rejection, or your publisher tells you, this book of your heart is not going to be their book, that is really hard to deal with. But I really help clients to understand that that's a superpower, to be that feeling, to have that level of empathy, to feel. I mean, I describe writing a book as like running around your neighborhood in your underwear and asking everyone to tell you what they think. It's like, why would a person do this to themselves? And yet that's what makes your book good, is that level of deep feeling. So I think that that is one of the key things. And then just this willingness to stay with it, because that no one wants to hear this initially. We want to think that if we just write the right thing, query the right way, and that's not how it is. It really, like, if you want a career as an author, I am doing a mastermind right now with 12 writers where we're talking about this.
Mhm.
And the thing that I am constantly reminding them of is you just have to write book after book after book after book, and know that not all of them will work out. It's like very much a long game.
What's your favorite piece of advice as an author to give to aspiring?
Yeah. Well, I always say you can do it because I feel like the entire industry, like go on Twitter and it's just, no, you can't do anything else. I mean, I've even heard like commencement speakers say, pick something else if you can do it. And I'm thinking, like, why would you say that? Are you trying to narrow the competition? Readers can't find enough books. If you go on any Reddit thread, whether you like, I don't know, werewolf fiction, romance, literary fiction, there's always this thing of like, well, tell me who else to read because I feel like I've read everything. There is enough room for everyone. And you don't have to be super gifted, thick-skinned, anything like that to make this happen. It really is just telling a better story, right? You're a storyteller, so start telling a better story about what you're doing and committing. It's like, no, I'm not going to let any one of these things get in my way of my dream. So that's it. It's like you can do it. I'm not the smartest, I'm not the best writer. As I was recently reminded, I still forget what passive voice is. Like, I've written like 14 books at this point, not including the ones I ghost wrote for other people. Like, you don't have to be the best, you just have to really want it.
What makes you really what do you enjoy most about writing?
So I say that you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. When you slip into a story and you're writing and time ceases to be, and you're just in that flow state, I am happiest when I'm writing a book. And that's probably why I write so many books. When
Mhm.
I don't, and I'm like between drafts, my husband's like, go find something to do, go for a run. Because I just get like really fidgety. It's just, there's something truly amazing about being able to create an entire world. And we don't always do it to our own standards. And that's why it's so uncomfortable, right? Ira Glass is this great thing about, your taste is why you get in the business, but then you can't measure up right away. And it's like
Uh-huh.
so hard.
Mhm.
So that is real. I would be lying if I said it wasn't. But also, like, what a joy to be able to do this thing. We are drawn to the work because we're drawn to the work. This is where I don't believe in, oh, go do something else. If
Mhm.
you are sitting down to write a story, it's because you're supposed to. So, yeah, it's very life affirming.
And what do you enjoy most about coaching and teaching writers.
So I find that life affirming. I just love to have these conversations where we're like talking about how to make it happen and talking about the books and the story and structure. And I know it was so transformative for me to realize a few small shifts. It wasn't becoming a different person. It wasn't any, I don't know, you see stuff about like reinvent yourself, just be someone else. And that's not what it is. It's like these little tiny shifts that change everything and allow you to show up in a way that you want to. And so to be able to do that for someone else is like the greatest work. And then I also think about the bigger impact. So every time I'm helping someone write a book, I am putting more good ideas out into the world. Very inadvertently, like, that's the side door, but it's one way of doing that. And I just think it's amazing. Yeah.
It is amazing. What do you know now that you wish you had known back then when you were writing that first, or just starting to try to get that first one published?
So this is not uncommon advice, but I don't think it can be said enough of just your path won't look like anyone else's.
Mhm.
So when I wrote that first book and I sold it at auction with all the foreign rights and, all the great things, I'd seen other people do that and keep selling book after book.
Mhm.
And the reason why it was so devastating to have my publisher drop me and to not be able to do it again for a while was because I thought it was supposed to look a different way. And if I had just seen that my way would be the way for me and it would be fine, then I would have just saved myself a lot of pain.
Mhm.
Yeah, those 3 years were so, so painful. And now I'm like, that's exactly what was supposed to happen. If I'd not gone through that process of writing those cruddy books and found my authentic writing voice, the rest of it wouldn't have happened the way it did. So, yeah.
How do you keep these days? Well, you said that writing is your happy place, but 8 novels and
Hmm.
a lot of the publication process, as you've alluded to, can be grueling. How
Yeah.
do you keep it fun and keep it your happy place and not, get burnt out and let it start to feel like work?
So the thing that I wish I had thought about even like mid-career
Mhm.
was really writing books for myself. So that second book that I referred to was a joy because I wrote it for myself. Same with the first one. I didn't tell anyone other than my husband and my friend who was dying that I was writing a novel. And there's something about that space of just doing it for you. That's not to say don't tell people. Like, I don't believe in jinxing yourself.
Mhm.
But the couple books where I am like, oh, I don't know about that. I had written them to please an editor where they were like, we really want you to write more of this. And I really love writing life affirming love stories, right? They're single protagonists. They are typically strong character arc, all the hallmarks of kind of contemporary slash women's fiction. But I
Mhm.
love the love element of it. That just like, that's what I like to read. And every time I was talked out of doing that in a book, I just was like, why did you do that, Camille? So, and those were the harder ones. So as long as you're writing to please yourself, that's where you stay in that flow and that joy.
How do you tackle that kind of situation now?
Hmm.
Your editor is asking you to do something that you don't feel comfortable with. You're obviously
Yeah.
quite established these days, but and what kind of advice would you give for, someone who's more starting out too? How do you deal with it, and how would you tell your clients to deal with it if you're being asked to write something that you're just not changes you're not comfortable with making?
It's almost easier earlier in your career because when you're further along, you're like your lane has been kind of created for you. Of course, you've created it, but also there's a lot of branding that goes into it. So
Mhm.
the book that I wrote that my publisher said absolutely not was it had a magical realism element.
Mhm.
And I don't write magical realism, as all of my books kind of have the similar feel. I write a certain kind of title, I write a certain kind of tone. And I do find it a little more challenging to speak up when they're expecting something from you.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, any good publisher and editor will understand that it is your name on the cover. And
Mhm.
you really do have agency. Say it nicely, be a professional, but you can say no.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I believe in not So I've always had a second income stream, even when I, have had really, really, really good years. And I've made over $1 million on fiction. And I say that just to tell people, yes, you can be like not on the New York Times bestseller list. Maybe your aunt who's in like 4 book clubs has never heard of you. You can still make a lot of money writing fiction.
Mhm.
Um, that said, I've always had another income stream of some sort, journalism, consulting, coaching, because I love the ability to very easily say, no, this won't work for me. There's
That's
a freedom there, and that allows me to write the book that I want to write.
how do you mentioned the journalism just now. How do you think that your work as a journalist for such a long time has influenced the way that you write fiction?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, some of that deadline driven nature that I have, where I know, okay, I'm going to write the book in 4, 5, 6 months, whatever I set for myself. Deadlines are such a way of life for me that it's pretty easy to sit down and say, okay, 1,200 words today, go. So that I had to unlearn a lot of things. So my first book, some of the criticism I received, Publishers Weekly wrote this worst review of my entire career, where they're just like very clunky, not without humor, but very clunky. And when I look back, I just revised that book to self-publish it because I got the rights back and really streamlined a lot of what they were talking about. And I see now very clearly that it was journalism. I wanted to put like little health facts in. There's a certain cadence to writing as a journalist, regardless of the publication. And I had to kind of unlearn that. And that's where I think those 3 years were so magical.
Mhm.
I learned to differentiate my journalism writing and my novel writing, my fiction. Yeah.
How in these days when you're heading out on book tour talking about
Mhm.
burning out with the writing, also I mean, then you're going out and you're promoting your work and
Yeah.
all these books. And while it does seem amazing, I can imagine that book tours would be very grueling as well. Lots of interviews, lots of readings, lots of travel in the
I
before
don't
times, and
I
some
don't do it.
you don't do it.
No.
Okay.
So it's so there, I believe in having a couple key events around a book.
Uh-huh.
And when you have those opportunities, whether it's a local bookseller where you have a community showing up for you. I did an event with Zibby Owens a couple books ago that was just amazing. Like she just throws these literary salons in her apartment and celebrates your books. Things like that I will always do. But in terms of going on book tour, so it's the 80/20 rule, right? 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort.
Mhm.
That 20% is always writing a book. And for me, I mean, I have 2 kids. Um, I, need to make money. That's how I pay the mortgage and all the things.
Mhm.
And it's just not a priority for me to be on the road for an extended period of time. And so I just don't. I don't believe it's a great way to connect with booksellers. I love that, but
Mhm.
it is not how you sell books. Selling books is having a backlist. It's writing the next book and the next one. That's it. Yeah. And there is an energetic cost. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so this is where I look very carefully at my schedule. And coaching has made it even easier because I coach in the afternoons.
Mhm.
So usually Monday through Wednesday are when I book the majority of my clients from noon until as late as 5 or 6, depending on how it goes.
Mhm.
I really try to accommodate people's schedules. So I often have someone who's doing it after work. Um, you can't be on the road all the time when you're doing that. And it is as much a priority for me to show up for my clients as it is for myself. So it's just kind of an easy no.
Are there a lot of authors that do that, that just say no?
Increasingly, yes, because twofold. So, one, publishers are beginning to understand that this is often, unless you're already established, right? If you're David Sedaris or Kristen Hanna or someone like this, and you go on tour, that is going to sell books.
Mhm.
But that's a whole other ball game. But for your mid-list, your debut author, that's not necessarily what's going to lead to the sales.
Mhm.
And it's another expense for them. And so I don't hear a lot of pushback from colleagues who aren't doing extended tours.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think times are changing a lot. Not to mention Zoom, even 2 years ago. but now everyone knows how to use it and you can just show up. So what I do say yes to constantly, I love doing book groups. Book groups will have you on Zoom, you show up, they're all, there with your book, sometimes a glass of wine. They ask you questions. There's no hour or two in the car getting there. You just show up for them. It's an hour out of your night and it's so lovely. So I do a lot of those, as many as I can do, because that's not a major time or energy um, issue for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Speaking of time and energy,
Hmm.
how do you keep your writing organized? You're doing 3 hours a day, you said, of straight like so.
Yeah.
I know you you like to know what you're going to be writing about and do that.
Yeah.
But do you like use Scrivener, or are there
I do.
specific? Okay, do you have,
Yeah. I love Scrivener.
okay.
And I don't even use all the bells and whistles that I see a lot of people using. Just very basic. Have my draft, I have my outline, I have my log line in there, and then like a little research folder. But I really like the layout because it's interesting. I say I'm a visual person, but I think most writers are. I
Mhm.
just hear this again and again where we having something to see all clearly laid out in front of us, whether it's an outline or a nice clean draft. And Scrivener does that in a way that Word just doesn't. And it doesn't crash regularly. And I love that. I can lose entire like weeks of my life to crashes. It's so upsetting.
Are there is there anything besides Scrivener, any tips that you sort of give for people to be able to keep their ideas and their writing organized as they're working through a
I've heard
novel?
it all, but it's basically just write it down. So
Mhm,
whether that is in a notebook or a very organized file or whatever you want to use, I mean, you know that thing where you wake up from a dream or first thing in the morning and you have an idea and you don't write it down and it's gone forever. A
mhm,
lot of ideas are like that. So it's just whatever you're using. I will even email myself and I just have a little folder on my computer for or within my inbox. It's like ideas where you just hear something on the radio and
mhm.
you just want to put it in there in case you ever want to return to it. 90% of the stuff is junk, but that 10% becomes a book. So, yeah.
What are you reading right now?
Oh, I have read so many blurb books. Oh, but I am in the middle of Get a Life, Chloe Brown,
Mhm.
by Talia Hibbert, and it is so charming and so good. And I needed something almost like a palate cleanser between books. I had just read so many blurb books, and I love blurbing other people's books, but you're looking at a PDF on a Kindle or your iPad, and it's not necessarily the easiest reading
Mhm.
compared to the way it's, when it's pre-formatted. So I bought a physical book and I'm reading that, and it's lovely. I'm also reading Albert Brooks's Strength to Strength, and it's about making meaning in midlife, and it's beautiful. Yeah, it's really good.
What is your favorite? What would you say is your favorite thing that you've read recently within the last year or so, I guess?
Oh, so Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I love Lily King. I think she's amazing. I loved Euphoria so much, and Writers and Lovers was a whole different kind of book.
Mhm,
And yet, so I often talk about branding in the sense of like, what are people going to get when they pick up your book? And
mhm,
it's really about mood. We often think it's topic, but
mhm,
there's a mood that a writer creates, whether they realize it or not. And you want someone to come back to you because they want a certain kind of mood. It's almost like I like to talk about Oreos, even though I'm not an Oreo fan. Like, why do people buy Oreos? They know what they're going to get every time.
mhm.
It's not an identical plot. It's just that feel. And I feel like Lily King, her books all feel that way, even though Euphoria was set, it's almost historical fiction and set in the past.
Mhm.
Writers and Lovers, very contemporary, very different books. But I just had this like warm feeling when I was reading them.
What book do you find yourself recommending the most? And I'd actually love to know craft wise, like books on
Hmm.
writing, since you are a coach, but
Ooh,
and also fiction
yeah.
for fun.
So, oh gosh, where to start? The book I recommend most often is Laurie Colwin's Family Happiness.
Mhm.
I just love her books. She passed away, I think, in the early 90s. and wrote a bunch of slim little books about love and domestic life and being a woman during this kind of changing time in the world. And they're just like comfort food to me. She also wrote a bunch of essays on food, actually, home cooking and home cooking too. And she writes about New York life, and I just loved being in New York. And so that to me, I'm like, oh, go read one of those. There, you just cannot go wrong with a Lori Colwin book. Craft, I really love The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Oh, I love that one too.
Yeah, for mindset, everything has been done on craft, and they're all, Bird by Bird is great. Stephen King's on writing. There's so many good ones out there, but for me, it's all about the mindset and just like committing to doing it.
Who do you consider to be your strongest author influences?
Oh, it's so interesting. It's changed so much. I remember being 20, interning in New York. I was in this little crappy apartment reading White Teeth
Mhm.
and thinking, oh, she's young and she wrote a book and I really want to do this. Today, I would never say that Zadie Smith is one of my influences. Her writing is so literary compared to what I'm doing. When I wrote Life, I had read a lot of Jonathan Tropper, and he was the only person I really saw who was just that kind of naked wit that I bring to my books, where you're saying the ugly things that people don't necessarily share with each other.
Mhm.
And so he was very influential at that time. Nick Hornsby, too, has that same kind of, you're seeing the interior in a way that not everyone shows you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite writing exercise?
I mean, I love morning pages. I think that's such a good exercise. And both as a writer and a coach, I think getting it out of your head, because so often we don't realize that it's all just stewing in there and it's causing pain or discomfort or whatever is going on. So when you have it on the page, and you can burn after writing, right?
Mhm.
But just like, oh, that's what I'm thinking. Okay, now we know what we're going to work through. Yeah, there's something about that.
Do you take your morning pages and reread them often when you're starting to sort of like sit down and do the writing, or is there a specific way that you use them, or is it just more sort of
Well,
getting stuff out of your head?
it is. Every once in a while, I'll go back. I'll keep them for about a year, and then my drawer will fill up, and so I have to throw them all out. And it's really interesting to see that growth. So when I'm coaching people, I use Slack to put all of our coaching notes. For writers, we really like that written record. There's something about being able to reread it. And so I will take notes while we're coaching, put them in the Slack folder, and I always have people go back and read from week one. And that's when you can see that change, because it's really hard to see it in yourself because
Mhm.
you're still you. You're like expecting to be someone else, but you're still you. And then you go read the notes and it's like, whoa, I am not operating that way anymore. Like, this is incredible. So I will look back on my journals for the same reason, to just be like, oh, that's not even a thing anymore for me.
Mhm.
It's exciting.
I've got one last question, which is
Okay.
always, it's sort of always the last question. It's a fun one. And it is this: if or when
Hmm.
Everything Must Go is turned into a movie or a series,
Oh,
what do you see the theme song being?
oh my goodness. I don't know. Maybe it's Never Let Me Go by Florence and the Machine. My daughter and I like to listen to that one, and I think it would be, and it's got that bittersweet kind of edge to it that this book has. So maybe that.
Great.
Yeah, it's so fun.
Thank you so much, Camille, for coming on and joining today to talk about not only your great new book and your writing, but your coaching,
Yeah, thank
and
you.
share all of these wonderful tips. And if people do want to get in touch with you about coaching, are you taking on new
Yeah,
clients?
yep.
And through Instagram, they can find you.
Yes, and my website is evenbetter.co, so co.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you, Kelly.
so
Such
much,
a pleasure.
Camille.
Yeah.
Wonderful talking with you.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.